Charles Taylor has no right to ask my resignation. We have a government that was duly elected by the people of this country. And anything that has to do with resignation must come from the people themselves and not Mr. Charles Taylor. So to answer your question, I'm not going to resign. These are
the beginning and the end of a dictator, Samuel Kanyon Doe, a former Liberian president. In this video, you will know who is Samuel Kanyon Doe. How Doe led a military coup in Liberia. How Doe presidency looks like in Liberia. Increased repression of the people of Liberia by Doe. Civil war that led to Doe downfall. How Doe was captured. Doe torture and execution. Who is Samuel Kanyon Doe? Samuel Kanyon Doe was born on May 6, 1951. He was a Liberian politician who served as the Liberian leader from 1980 to 1990, first as a military leader and later as a civilian. While as a master sergeant in the armed forces of Liberia, Doe led a military coup on the 12th of April 1980 by attacking the Liberian executive mansion and killing President William Tolbert Jr. Doe forces killed another 26 of Tolbert's supporters in the fighting. 13 members of the cabinet were publicly executed 10 days later. Shortly after the coup, government ministers were walked publicly around Monrovia in the nude and then summarily executed by a firing squad on the beach. The convicted were denied the right to a lawyer or to any appeal. Hundreds of government workers fled the country, while others were imprisoned. After the coup, Doe assumed the rank of general and established a People's Redemption Council (PRC), composed of himself and 14 other low-ranking officers, to rule the country. The early days of the regime were marked by mass executions of members of Tolbert's deposed government. Doe ordered the release of about 50 leaders of the opposition Progressive People's Party, who had been jailed by Tolbert during the rice riots of the previous month. How Doe presidency looks like. During his rule, Doe portrayed himself as an enlightened leader whose actions were intended to bring relief to many. He styled himself Dr. Doe, starting in 1982, after making a state visit to Chundu-Wan in South Korea and being awarded an honorary doctorate from the University of Seoul. After 7 years of calling himself a doctor, Doe announced in 1989 that he had completed a bachelor's degree from the University of Liberia. Increased repression of Liberia people by Samuel Doe. General Thomas Kawankpa, who had been a leader of the 1980 coup along with Doe, attempted to seize power on November 12, 1985. The attempt failed after fighting in Monrovia, in which Kawankpa was killed. Doe also announced in a radio and television broadcast that anyone found on the streets after a 6 p.m. curfew would be considered a rebel and executed immediately. Doe's corrupt and totalitarian government became even more repressive after the attempted coup, shutting down newspapers and banning political activity. The government's mistreatment of certain ethnic groups, particularly the Geo, or Dan, and the Mano in the north, Kawankpa was an ethnic Geo, resulted in divisions and violence among indigenous populations who until then had coexisted peacefully. Civil war that led to Samuel Doe downfall. Charles Taylor, a former ally of Doe, crossed into Liberia from the Ivory Coast on December 24, 1989, to wage a guerrilla war against Doe. Taylor had broken out of a jail in the United States, where he was awaiting extradition to Liberia on charges of embezzlement. The conflict quickly flared into full-fledged civil war. By mid-1990, most of Liberia was controlled by rebel factions. During the Civil War, Monrovia Church was attacked and approximately 600 civilians were killed at the church in the Sinker section of Monrovia on the 29th of July 1990. The massacre was carried out by approximately 30 government soldiers loyal to President Samuel Doe. The perpetrators were of Doe's Kron tribe, while most of the victims were from the Geo and Mano tribes, which were in support of the rebels. How Samuel Doe was captured. Doe was captured in Monrovia on September 9, 1990, by Prince Y. Johnson, leader of INPFL, a breakaway faction of Taylor's NPFL. General Quinu, the head of ECOMOG, had invited Doe to the ECOMOG headquarters for a meeting and assured him of his safety from the rebels. On the morning of September 9, 1990, Doe arrived at a precarious time during an ongoing change in guard duty from the well-armed and better-equipped Nigerian team of peacekeepers to the weaker Gambian contingent. The Nigerian team had just withdrawn from the scene when Doe's convoy of lightly armed personnel arrived. Doe was escorted to General Quinu's office where he was formally welcomed, while most of his team of aides and guards waited outside. Johnson's rebels surprised everyone by suddenly arriving on the scene uninvited and heavily armed, overwhelming and disarming the entirety of Doe's team while encountering no resistance. They then started shooting Doe's team individually and later in groups. Upon hearing the gunshots from outside, Doe expressed concern to Quinu, who assured him that all was fine. Quinu later excused himself to check on what was happening outside and was followed by his aide, Captain Coker of the Gambian contingent. Both men took cover upon assessing the situation. Johnson's men moved indoors, finished off Doe's remaining team, shot him in the leg, and took him. When the dust settled, over 80 of Doe's men lay dead. Coker characterized the incident not as a fight but a brutal massacre. Remarkably, none of the ECOMOG personnel were shot in the carnage. Torture and execution of Samuel Doe. Doe was taken to Johnson's military base. To prove that he was not protected by black magic, Johnson ordered Doe's ears be cut off in his presence. Shackles were also placed around Doe's legs and something strange was tied around his glands, as can be seen in the recording. At the end of the recording, Doe was forced to get up, and some of his fingers and toes were also amputated. After 12 hours of torture at Johnson's hands, Doe was finally murdered. His corpse had its head shaved and was exhibited naked in the streets of Monrovia with cigarette burns. Doe's body was later exhumed and reburied. The spectacle of his torture was videotaped and seen on news reports around the world. The video shows Johnson sipping a beer as Doe's ear is cut off. Bill Clinton says, and I quote, "The road to tyranny, we must not forget, begins with the destruction of the truth." Thank you for watching. Kindly subscribe to get you notified for more.